Hey guys, so when I see a title like The 12 Rules for Life, I tend to think of books like The 48 Laws of Power or The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where they're books where the title of each chapter has some rule or principle, and then the content of that chapter tries to convince you of that rule or principle using interesting stories or clever rhetoric. This book is a little bit different. Each of the rules is the title of a chapter, but the content of the chapter is not quite, it's not really about convincing you of the literal rule. It really has a slightly different point. The rules themselves are, I would say, heuristics, little statements that are easy to remember and are related to the rule in some way. Maybe Peterson does this so that you can't just, flip through the table of contents and sort of get the gist of the book. You actually have to read it in order to get the value out of it. But in this review, I'm going to give you my take on what the substance of each of the 12 rules actually is. So the first rule, the literal statement, is stand up straight. What this is really about is being assertive, because in society we live in a world where there are a lot of hierarchies, and if you're assertive you can sort of better defend your place on the hierarchy, and it can actually change your psychology to be more successful in competition. The second rule is treat yourself like someone you're responsible for taking care of. This rule is also about lifting up yourself, but it's more of the internal version of the first rule, which is being assertive. That's sort of an external display. This is more about internal attitude. It's saying have self-respect and treat yourself, um, treat yourself as someone worth taking care of. This may seem obvious, but at the same time, there are studies that show that people take care better of other people than themselves. And it has to do with the fact that we know all of our flaws. We know when sometimes we don't care about our own well being. And what Pearson is saying that, yes, that is true, but we can make a choice to do better by ourselves and to be good people and to be worthy of um, respect by ourselves, basically. Rule 3 is be friends with those who want what's best for you. What he's really saying here is don't mix the good with the bad, because the bad will more easily contaminate the good than the good will necessarily lift up or rescue the bad. Often that's the case. Rule 4, the literal statement, is compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not who other people are today. What this is saying is really just be humble. Be humble in your expectations before the world, and be humble in your expectations before yourself, because our minds all have their own natures, and we can't just tyrannize our own minds even. We can't just decide to be someone who we are not. And so aim for goals that are reachable, that are reasonable, and take pleasure in reaching those small goals day to day as you build up towards your bigger goals. Rule 5 is don't let your children do anything that will make you dislike them. The essence of the lesson here is really that people respond to incentives. If you want someone to do something more, give them a reward. And if you want someone to stop doing something, disincentivize that and punish that. It really applies to adults as well as children. Rule number 6 is take care of your own house and get it in perfect order before criticizing the world. What this is really saying is it's perversely an act of self-love to place value in the things that you can control and not in the things that you can't control, because if you value things that you can't control, then you have no defense if things go badly. You can't control it. you're helpless. But if you place value in things that you can control, then you have the ability to make that better. And it's better for your own well-being and mindset and mental health. The seventh rule is do what is meaningful and not what is expedient. This rule is really about sacrifice. It's about the fact that sometimes when we sacrifice some things, we get other things that are just as good or better. Hard work pays off, delayed gratification pays off. And really sacrifice the ability, willingness to sacrifice. Um, when you think about it, it's kind of like a preparation for death because I mean we're all mortal and we can't really hold on to anything forever. Not to get too morbid, but that's one possible take on it. Rule number 8 is tell the truth or at least don't lie. So there's a form of lying where the motivation is that you don't really want to face the truth because you can't face it. Um, it's too ugly, it's too depressing, it's too bad. And so you lie to others or you lie to yourself and pretend that it's not the case. But this doesn't really fix anything because it still doesn't change reality. And sooner or later, reality always catches up. So what Peterson's saying here is don't do this kind of lie to others or yourself. It's better to admit even unpleasant truths early than to sort of take the attitude that it's too bad even to admit, it's too bad even to acknowledge. That will actually make you feel worse because you know that you're lying to yourself at some level. Rule number 9 is assume that the person you're speaking to knows something that you don't. What this is really about is having genuine dialogue. A lot of times in our conversations, our goal is to just, prove that we're right or prove something to other people or establish our status or dominance. But that's not a real conversation. There are things to learn from other people, and if we can do that, we can establish better relationships. It also applies to your conversations within yourself, because a lot of the times when we're thinking, we're not really thinking. We're just, trying to convince ourselves of something. Um, but sometimes when you're really thinking, you sort of have two selves in your mind, neither of which are straw men, both of which are real, and one of them they're sort of in a dialogue or debate with one another, and one of them will disappear, but you don't know which one it is. It's not an obvious state to be in. Rule number 10 is to be precise in your speech. What this is really saying is, I mean, if you think about the vast majority of things out there are very imprecise. You don't really think about them in a precise way. They're just very vague and chaotic. Um, but if you start to define it precisely, you can sort of bring it out from the background and make it into something more manageable. So this is a way to tackle problems. This is a way to tackle things that you're anxious about. If you can define them precisely, that's the first step to solving the problem. Rule number 11, basically don't mess with kids who are skateboarding. And the essence of this rule is, well, skateboarding is something that is dangerous, but it is also something that requires skill and build skill. And so what he's really saying here is that sometimes dangerous activities are valuable, even though it may be our instinct to protect kids from them or protect ourselves from them. They serve a purpose of building skill and, in a way, preparing ourselves for crises, because sometimes a dangerous situation will come whether you want it or not. More likely than not, at some point it will happen. And so by sort of engaging in these semi-dangerous activities, people are preparing themselves for this. And that's a good thing. The last rule is my favorite. Rule number 12, pet a cat if you see one in the alley. And it's really about dealing with suffering. The age-old question, because there's so much suffering in life. And what he's really saying here is one way to deal with it is to um, just take more pleasure in the good things in life. Don't let the good things pass you by. Um, Suffering can be a motivator and a catalyst for love. It can be a motivator and catalyst for joy and leaning into joy and just leaning into the small pleasures of life. So there's just so much in this book. I'm sorry if this was a little fast, but yeah, Peterson draws a lot from the Bible, and he draws a lot from 20th century history, which I really appreciated. So yeah,